There's some fabulous research on certain dietary patterns and certain foods and nutrients can actually help to maybe not completely alleviate, but certainly dampen down some of the symptoms that can be very problematic for a lot of women throughout perimenopause.
Hello and welcome to a brand new series of Thriving in Menopause, brought to you by Prevention Magazine. I'm Zoe Mernier, the editor of Prevention. It's great to be back to continue more great conversations with experts in their fields who can help make the menopausal journey easier. Now, of course, weight gain during midlife is something that so many of us want to address. But eating the right foods at this time in our lives goes well beyond simply reshaping or maintaining our physique. Getting our nutrition right as we go through perimenopause can also be instrumental in helping to keep many of those debilitating symptoms at bay, while also setting us up for aging well into the future. To tell us more, we're excited to be joined today by accredited practising dietitian and nutritionist Jaime Rose Chambers, author of the recently released book, The Peri Diet, Eating for a Happy and Healthy Perimenopause and Beyond. Jaime, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so let's summarise briefly why perimenopause so frequently causes us to gain weight or for our body composition to change.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think for so long we just, women accepted that when you hit perimenopause and menopause, that it was just an inevitable part of the journey. However, we know so much more about why these changes happen in perimenopause. And ultimately, it all comes down to the changes in our hormones that happen. So specifically, one pesky little hormone called estrogen, which starts to decline when we hit perimenopause. It's not a linear decline. It kind of goes up and down and all over the place. It's a bit like a roller coaster. But effectively what it causes is a loss of muscle mass. And that muscle is so important for maintaining metabolic health. And weight is very much tied into that. So as we start to lose this muscle, they believe it can be somewhere around 10% of our muscle mass that we lose throughout the perimenopause journey. What that does is if you think about muscle as like a bit of a calorie burning furnace, when we start to lose that muscle, we don't have the same ability to burn that number of calories again. The other thing that the body does, and this is a really interesting theory that they're about to test at Sydney University with a big study, is that they think that in our body goes searching for more protein then as we start to lose this muscle mass. And in order to do that, we can't necessarily, our body can't, sort of make us want more protein necessarily. It just generally cranks up our appetite. So we eat more so we can access more protein. And therefore, what ends up happening is we consume more calories overall, which therefore can lead to weight gain as well. So there's quite a number of different things going on in terms of the weight gain that occurs through perimenopause.
Interesting, that whole protein thing. Now, apart from a weight perspective, why is it so important for us to be more conscious of our diets once we hit our 40s?
Well, there's a number of things. So the first is that we can, to some degree, control some of the symptoms of perimenopause. There's some fabulous research on symptoms such as hot flushes, on mood changes, and certain dietary patterns and certain foods and nutrients that have been shown in some fantastic research that can actually help to maybe not completely alleviate, but certainly dampen down some of the symptoms that can be very problematic for a lot of women throughout perimenopause. The second thing is it's the long game, right? So once we hit menopause, we are far more at risk of some of those chronic diseases that can pop up, such as type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease. Often they're tied into the change to our body composition as well, and that pesky weight gain that happens, particularly around our middle, as well as our bone health as well. So not only do we start to lose muscle mass, but we start to lose bone mass as well. And that's why our requirements for calcium go up once we hit menopause. So we really want to make sure that we're watching what we eat and we're hitting those nutritional targets and really looking after ourselves through perimenopause so that we can lower the risk of some of those sort of bigger problematic conditions that might pop up after menopause.
Yeah, so there's absolutely so many reasons why we should be looking at our nutrition. Just going back to those perimenopausal symptoms, I mean, how much of a difference does it make? And it is kind of something that's not necessarily across the board as to how effective it might be. Is that right?
That's exactly right. It's very personal. And sometimes you won't really know. I mean, nutrition is a tricky one because there's so many factors in play, and also it's, you often can't directly relate it to nutrition either, because there's so much going on. I mean, I just think about most of the women I know in their 40s are busy and tired, and they've got so much going on in their lives. So it's like, am I feeling a little moody because I got woken up by my kids in the middle of the night, or I've just had a huge bill or a big project come on at work, or is it perimenopause symptoms? So look, it's really difficult to know. But what I love about diet and nutrition is that, even if it doesn't directly help your symptoms right then and there, it's going to help you in so many other ways right now as well as later on. And it is also something tangible that we can really sink our teeth into, where I think a lot of things very much feel out of our control in many aspects of our life. Diet and nutrition is one thing we can control.
Yes, absolutely. So are there any specific perimenopausal symptoms that we know to be particularly influenced by diet, or is it just kind of like, hit and miss?
No. Well, I mean, I think that probably the big and probably most obvious ones are our protein intake and the ability for us to maintain that muscle mass, and therefore the roll-on effect that has on our weight and our metabolic health and our body composition, and therefore the likelihood of us, getting things like cardiovascular disease and diabetes. So that's a big one. The second is our calcium and vitamin D intake. That is going to influence our bone health. So that's a huge one too. One that I really love are phytoestrogens. So if you think that the main cause and the trigger of a lot of the symptoms in perimenopause is because our estrogen levels are declining. If you look at phytoestrogens, which effectively are plant estrogens, what they can do is give a little boost of our body to some plant-based estrogens. So they may not be as powerful as our own estrogen within our body, but they certainly have shown to have some really interesting and positive effects on some of the side effects and the symptoms of perimenopause. So, for example, phytoestrogens were shown to decrease symptoms like hot flushes by 40% in some research. So that's pretty powerful, and can really make quite a difference to some women who are suffering quite badly from hot flushes.
Yeah. Can you just quickly name some of the foods that are highest in phytoestrogen?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So my favorite are flax seeds or linseeds. So I'm not talking the random little dots that you see in soy and linseed sourdough. I'm talking ground flaxseed. It's not enough. We need to act those. They're hard little seeds. Those things. Our gut is not great at breaking them down and accessing the nutrition inside. So I always recommend having them in a ground form. So I keep my pre-ground flax seeds in a bag in the fridge so that they don't go rancid and they stay fresh for longer. And I use them all over the place. So you want to have at least sort of a couple of teaspoons or up to a couple of tablespoons a day. And they taste quite good. They're quite sort of nutty, seedy sort of flavor. I add them to smoothies and in yogurt and, through porridge and all sorts of different things. I use them in baking and cooking. I replace eggs with them. So they're otherwise known as a flax egg. And that's quite good because my son is allergic to eggs. So that works really well in our household. So that's a great one. The other is soy products. So I know soy is quite controversial, but overall, unless you have some significant family history or history of breast cancer, and you really want to check with your specialist, overall soy has been shown to be very good for us. So we're talking whole soy products, loving edamame, where, you can buy them frozen and use them in salads and all sorts of things. Tofu, of course, used, in stir fries. And I've got a beautiful chocolate pudding made from tofu that you would never know it was made from tofu in the book, and it's really good. And then, of course, tempeh and soy milk as well. Fantastic.
Okay, so let's just go back to some of the perimenopause symptoms that I was reading about in your book. Now, obviously, we know of a lot of the typical ones, like your hot flushes and stuff. But one that I found interesting was some digestive symptoms that are common during perimenopause. Can you explain how these tend to manifest?
Yeah, sure. So they believe that, a lot of these symptoms are triggered by the effects that estrogen has on the brain. And basically those fluctuating hormones in perimenopause affect the part of the brain that controls our digestion. So I guess you could kind of liken it to a lot of women have digestive upsets throughout their menstrual cycle as well, where they might perhaps be a little bit constipated in the lead up to their period and then have some loose stools afterwards. So a similar kind of thing that's happening. However, because perimenopausal symptoms are all over the shop, these symptoms can be all over the shop too. They might manifest and look a little bit like IBS as well. Interestingly, about 42% of women in perimenopause report having heartburn. So that's a really kind of interesting statistic as well. And so, look, I guess whenever we're looking at the gut and when I'm treating a patient with gut issues, it's really about looking at what their personal situation is and targeting that. So the way that we would target diarrhea, for example, or loose stools would be different to constipation. So just looking at, what their patterns are like and what they're experiencing and what their diet looks like and their lifestyle, and really targeting a treatment plan that's personalized to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Because obviously, I guess stress can be a big factor in digestive health as well, can't it? And again, it's a period of life that is pretty stressful.
That's absolutely true.
We'll be right back after this.
All women experience menopause in their own unique way. And for many, menopause can bring challenging symptoms like hot flushes, night sweats, mood swings, and mild anxiety. Supporting your body through this transition is essential to your well-being. It's time to focus on you. To help you on your journey, Premensal Menopause is a non-hormonal plant-based product designed to help relieve menopausal symptoms. The Premensal range has been designed to ensure you're not held back from embracing this new life stage. Choose from Premensal's menopause range to support you through all the stages of menopause. It's time to get back to being you. Always read the label and follow the directions for use.
Okay, we're back. Okay, so talking about your book isn't proposing a specific diet as such, but it's more a general way of eating that helps support the body and mind and also minimises perimenopausal weight gain. So you suggest in your book that perimenopausal women choose one of 4 foundation diets, to which they then add these peri-supporting nutrients. So could you talk us through those 4 foundation diets?
Yeah, sure. So I think as a dietitian, one of the most important things that I can stress is that there is no one prescriptive diet for everyone. And, it's really about gathering information and personalizing it to you. And that's basically what I do every day in clinic is, gathering all this information about my patient and then personalizing a nutrition plan for them. So this book is designed to give you plenty of information so you're armed with all this education, and then you can make those decisions and choices based on your circumstances and what is relevant to you and where you're at with your symptoms and your life and what you're trying to achieve in your goals. So the foundation diet is sort of like step 1, I suppose. And this is really based on, what your taste preferences are like, your budget, who else you're living with. Are you living with someone who's a vegetarian and eating with them? Are you eating with young kids who are quite fussy? So it's really based on your circumstances, what suits you best. So the number 1 is the Mediterranean diet. Now, this is and has been for a very long time considered the number 1 diet in the world for so many different reasons. It's considered anti-inflammatory. It's great for our brain, our heart, so many different things. I would stress that it is, not the way that you would eat if you went on a European holiday right now. It's the way that Nonna would have eaten in a little village, on a Greek island 50 years ago. So lots of oily fish, lots of healthy fats, seafood, minimally processed foods, lots of colourful fruit and vegetables, extra virgin olive oil. So we know that this is associated with a longer lifespan and healthy aging. The second is a Japanese style diet. And if you think about it, they are really strong on tofu and soy-based products. They're very good with their vegetables and fermented foods. So, and I recently read something really interesting that said Japan is possibly the poster child for how to do menopause. And that's because they have, if you think women, for example, in the Western world, 85% of them will experience hot flushes. In Japan, it's sort of like 25 to 50%. So the incidence of perimenopause symptoms is so much less. And we don't know why, but we can probably guess that diet probably has a lot to do with it. The third is a plant-focused diet. Now, this is not vegan, it's not vegetarian. It is literally just plant-focused, where roughly 80, maybe 90% of your diet is plant foods. Plant foods are fruits, vegetables, legumes and lentils, nuts and seeds, and whole grains is the last one. And so basically we want to make sure that, most of our diet is filled with those foods. And the rest is obviously our protein-based foods, our dairy foods, whether they are vegetarian sources or animal sources. So that's that pattern of eating has got so much brilliant research in terms of its positive impact on perimenopause and menopause. So I really love that one. And the DASH diet. So look, I don't talk about this one a lot because it's not very. It's a diet that's sort of predominantly, I guess, famous in America. It is a diet that was designed by some nutrition experts for blood pressure, actually. It is still, it's just another way to deliver a similar sort of information.
Yeah.
But it's got some brilliant research and very much worth looking up, particularly if you've got high blood pressure or any cardiovascular issues. Also a very good one, and also some strong associations with positive outcomes for perimenopause.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so let's now talk through some of those key peri-nutrients that can help support us during perimenopause. Like, we've brushed on some of these already, but let's knuckle down. Obviously, protein is probably first and foremost the most important nutrient that we're looking at, right?
That's correct, yeah. And so that's to mitigate that loss of muscle that happens, as I said before, about women lose about 10% of their muscle mass throughout perimenopause. Protein, look, it's a difficult one because there's varying recommendations. So mine is sort of somewhere in the middle of the range of protein recommendations. So I generally suggest somewhere around 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of your body weight, unless you are in a much bigger body and you might want to correct for your protein needs to be based on your ideal weight as opposed to your current weight. So, for most women, say, for example, a female who's roughly 75 to 80 kilograms, they might need 90 to 100 grams of protein a day, and we can break that down to roughly 30 grams of protein per main meal. So that is a general guide that I use quite a lot because 120 to 150 grams of, say, a lean steak or a skinless chicken breast or something like that is roughly about that 30 grams of protein. So it's a pretty good guide to work on. I generally find that lunch and dinner is they're pretty easy meals to cover that. Brekkie is often the biggest challenge. And even if we go for eggs, for example, 2 eggs only have about 12 to 14 grams of protein. So even still, we're not even close to hitting the target as far as protein goes. So that can be probably one of the biggest challenges in terms of meeting protein needs. The second, and we did touch on this before as well, but calcium, vitamin D is in combination is very important. We predominantly get vitamin D from the sun, but obviously that comes with its problems too in terms of skin cancer. So we just need to be careful if we can't have sun exposure that we're taking a supplement. If those vitamin D levels are low, can be tested with a simple blood test. Now, calcium, we need, before we hit menopause, we need about 1,000 milligrams of calcium a day. That's the equivalent of about 3 serves of dairy foods like milk, yogurt, and cheese, or a calcium fortified product. To be honest, anything that's not a calcium fortified milk, for example, like an almond milk that's been calcium fortified, or our dairy foods, you hear a lot about green leafy vegetables and almonds and tahini. If you really look at the quantity of how much you get of calcium from those foods, it's so minimal,
right.
But they do all add up. So if you do have those foods every day, they can all add up to, say, 1 serving. So I've got a calcium counter in the book that will give you a really good guide as to where you can get all your calcium from. So it's a good idea to go through and have a check and make sure that you're hitting those targets. We did talk about phytoestrogens before. I might skip over them because I think I probably went into quite a bit of detail with that. The next lot are really just foods that may not directly impact perimenopausal symptoms per se, but they contribute so greatly to good health and to lowering the risk of some of these chronic diseases that can pop up after menopause that they must be included in this list. So nuts, for example, the latest research shows we should all be having a handful of mixed unsalted nuts every day. They are fabulous for our brain. They are fabulous for our heart and so many other reasons. A lot of people are very concerned about the calorie content of these nuts. And I will assure you that all the research shows that by adding 30 grams of nuts a day has not only no impact on weight, as in it, no one gained weight in the research study. In fact, there was even a slight decrease in participants' weight in the research study. So there's no harm there. I get so many people that come in and say, but aren't they fattening? Aren't they fattening? So I want to assure you all that adding that to your diet is not a problem.
I think the problem is stopping at the 30 grams.
Yes, that is exactly right. They're so moreish. That's absolutely true.
Yes.
And what I might add to that, just while we're talking about it, is one of the ways that I like to put a snack together like that, if there is any food that you, like that you find difficult to stop, put it on a plate with some other things so that it's not the only thing that you're having. So, for example, you have your 30 grams of nuts on a small plate, like a little snack plate, for example, and you've got some berries and you've got a chopped carrot with some hummus and some other bits and pieces as well, so that it's not the only thing that you're having. You've got some other things filling you up as well. The next are berries. So berries are so good for us because they are packed with antioxidants and fiber and plant chemicals. They're great for our heart and our eyes and our brain, just like nuts are. They are a nutrition powerhouse, and we should absolutely be having a serving of them every day if we can. I'm a big fan of frozen berries because we can have them all year round and they're very cost effective. The next is extra virgin olive oil. Now, if there's ever a superfood, that is most certainly one of them. The research on extra virgin olive oil is astounding, and it's obviously one of the major components of the Mediterranean diet as well. So we can have up to 2 to 4 tablespoons a day. Use it Jamie Oliver style by glugging it all over your food. Similar sort of thing with nuts. It's shown not to impact our weight significantly. And that's probably because it's filling. Fat is very filling. It helps to keep us fuller for longer. So that's probably why it doesn't impact our weight. Fatty fish, so specifically trout, salmon, tuna, sardines, those sorts of fish, we should be having them about 3 to 5 times a week. They have a type of fat in them that we can't get really from anywhere else. So they are what we call an essential fat, an omega-3 fatty acid. Again, they are very strongly associated with lowering the rates of depression and mood disturbances through perimenopause. So they are a fantastic one to be including into a peri diet. Now, fiber is so important for gut health. Fiber also helps to fill us up and makes us feel fuller for longer. But what it does is it feeds those healthy little bugs in our gut and makes sure that our gut health is really good. So if you do particularly have any digestive disturbances as well, fiber is one to certainly focus on, so we can make sure that we're opening our bowels efficiently and that's not causing us any troubles. It's also been shown to help to regulate blood sugar levels, which of course then has a role and effect in terms of weight management, as well as lowering our cholesterol and reducing the risk of bowel cancer. So for women, 25 grams a day, it's actually a lot. And if you go through and do a little count, most people are not hitting that and not even close. So it's another good one to just go through and do a little bit of a calculation and make sure every day you're hitting those fiber targets. Now, vegetables, I wanted to desperately talk about 1 or 2 vegetables, but really it's just not that simple. We should be having the rainbow every day. I mean, that's ultimately what we should be doing. But 94% of Australians aren't getting enough vegetables. So that's 6% of Australians are actually meeting their vegetable targets consistently. And that is just, that's shocking.
That is not good.
It's not good. And look, again, it's a major part of the Mediterranean Foundation diet. It's a major part of a plant-focused diet. So, those vegetables, that's why those eating patterns, those foundation eating patterns are so good for us because they are so rich in those, colourful vegetables. They also give us all that fibre. There are some specific ones that are particularly good. So cruciferous vegetables, for example, They are things like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, Brussels sprouts. So they are a highlight vegetable that I definitely would recommend trying to have every day, as well as our green leafies. So baby spinach, kale, silver beet, those sorts of vegetables. And they're also very rich in overall, very rich in a mineral called magnesium. And magnesium has been shown to be a really important one in terms of brain health through perimenopause. A lot of women are looking at taking supplements, magnesium supplements through perimenopause, by all means. However, you can, just crank up those vegetables and you're probably likely to meet those magnesium needs just by making sure we're eating enough vegetables every day. There's a couple more. So fermented foods and probiotics. So these are fantastic. And we talked before about the Japanese foundation diet, and fermented foods are a big part of their diet, as well as the Korean diet. So with kimchi and tofu and miso and those sorts of things. One of the reasons why they're so good for us and why the incidence of perimenopausal symptoms is so low for these populations may be partly due to these fermented foods. Effectively, what they do is they help to support great gut health. And it's been shown that estrogen can actually affect the gut microbiota. So as those estrogen levels decline, there can be an impact on the gut and the environment in the gut. So we really want to look after our gut by having those fermented foods that will then provide us with some probiotics or some good gut bacteria, as well as probiotic foods. So yogurt is my favorite way of getting probiotics. And I must mention that not all yogurts contain probiotics. They will specify on the label that yogurt contains probiotics. So not naturally cultured, but actually actively added into the yogurt. So that's a really important point, I think. The last is iron. I see it all the time. So many premenopausal women, because of regular periods, they've got a very, very high iron requirement. Perhaps they've been through several pregnancies and breastfeeding, and often iron levels are very, very low. Now, perimenopause doesn't necessarily cause low iron, but because periods can change and periods can go from being, from fairly normal to perhaps very, very heavy in some cases, there is more blood loss and therefore iron levels can plummet really quickly. So if that is the case for you, I would definitely go and have your iron levels checked and make sure that they are okay, because one of my patients once said to me, it feels like she's dragging around a dead body. And that's how it felt to her to have low iron. And it is like that. It's not like you want to fall asleep and have a little nap. It's just like everything is hard. And we don't need to add that to our already hard lives.
Indeed. Oh, dear. So we know a lot about all the good foods that we should be eating. Are there any foods that have especially strong negative consequences during this period that we really should try and steer clear of as much as possible?
Yeah, and look, I don't think it's anything that we don't already know. Yeah. It's not special to perimenopause. It's the general recommendations that I think most of us are pretty familiar with. So ultra-processed foods, foods that are very high in refined sugars, so cakes, pastries, biscuits, packaged snack foods that contain things like palm oils. They're the ones that we really need to be careful of. Fast food, takeaway, depending on what the takeaway is, of course.
Yeah.
But anything cooked in that very hot, overused, deep-fried oil, we need to be really careful of. Excessive alcohol consumption, of course, we need to be careful with. Alcohol can certainly trigger some symptoms like hot flushes for a lot of women. So that's another one, that might be a more personal one. So again, I think we probably know all of the ones that are,
yeah.
As I said, it's not special to perimenopause.
No. And I'm just wondering if there's any specific nutrition needs that vary from the perimenopausal period through to when we have actually hit menopause. Does that sort of change what we need to focus on in any way?
Not necessarily. However, there is often an acceleration of some of these processes once those hormones have basically completely sputtered out. So once we hit menopause, those reproductive hormones they're done, they're finished. Instead of being like a roller coaster in perimenopause, menopause is when we have not had a menstrual period for a year. And so basically a lot of the symptoms that are happening through perimenopause and the mechanisms behind them, there can be an acceleration of that. So particularly muscle mass, particularly bone mass. And as I mentioned before, we go from needing 3 servings of dairy foods a day or 1,000 milligrams of calcium. As soon as we hit menopause, those recommendations change to 1,300 milligrams a day, or the equivalent of 4 servings of dairy foods a day.
Wow.
So that's quite a lot of calcium. When you're also then trying to manage, perhaps smaller portion sizes and, keeping our calories in check, that can be a real challenge to get all that in, let me tell you.
Yeah.
So that they're probably, I would say, the 2 main ones.
Okay. Well, look, unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. So thank you, Jaime, so much for joining us today. It's been amazing.
Thank you so much for having me, Zoe.
And readers, thank you for joining us as well. If you enjoyed our episode today, we'd love you to rate, review and subscribe. And we look forward to seeing you at our next episode. See you next time.